Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 24. Midnight Pulse. I listened to Adria, a bright, bubbly, middle-aged woman seated before a bonfire, regaling us with the dangerous exploits of when she was a youngster like us, back in the days before the Sunspire's creation, a time of dread and terror that came with constant periods of cold and dark wintry famine. What it was like living in a world where predators competed for the exact same food source, with dragons flying silently over lakes and hunt, afraid of burning iridescent firebugs and needle-nosed blood-sucking gnats, camouflaged like harmless stars and comets that lit up the sky, while the razor-sharp horns of stampeding torus-shaped beetles charged from the pitch-black covers of withering bushland and shrubbery, snatched up by the impaling hands of stalking mantis bugs, hiding in the canopy as they dangled down from the treetops, ambushing prey by dragging them up into the treetops, never to be seen again. Stories like hers were rare to come by, and ordinarily being tales I couldn't hear enough of. However, considering my run-in with Melina and other recent events, I tended to drift in and out of her story lazily, completely losing track of what she said at times, perhaps too drained or lost in my own vivid thoughts to be able to give her the attention she rightly deserved. From what I could gather about this Adria woman, she was a high-ranking, but recently retired, officer who unfortunately was reconscripted into the army in order to replenish the low number of trained netters that were essential to our survival out in the wild. For even though she never directly said it to us, I think every friend I had around that campfire knew she was one of the few nocturnal huntresses who was still proficient at laying down traps and protecting the perimeter of the convoy, once serving as one of the Crown's leading insurance policies in terms of keeping all the nocturnal predators away. She was possibly even the sole reason why no badland critters came out of their unseen sand burrows to feed on us while we slept out in the flat expanse of the long white desert. But even though she sat among us, telling stories of monsters we couldn't even comprehend to exist, she spoke with a heightened speed of somebody who was flustered or on edge, as if she were undergoing some kind of nervous revel test or tryout, and there was a time limit in which her story needed to be told in, although maybe this was just because she was still technically on duty throughout the twilight, free for just a short hour or so, while others were soon to swap her back into routine patrol of the beach's outskirts. The greatest irony for her being that she was such a reliable asset to the Crown that Melina had no choice but to drag her away from her kids and family. And back into the war, seeing no one else was half as talented as she was, with a rope and a few serrated hooks and nails. Given the greatest duty of all, it took almost that full hour beside her before she cared to inform any of us that she was the one in charge of watching over Midas and his cronies, responsible for keeping them locked tightly in chains. It intrigued me to know that Melina had given her one short evening's rest from being the elected prison warden, having been relieved from those duties just after my confrontation with her. Our queen personally choosing to stand watch over Midas and the dark enclosed iron carriage straight after offering me her gold and her pardon, appearing as if she no longer trusted even her most loyal associates to ensure he remained locked up. Genuinely thrilled to be among us, though, Adria was ecstatic about the fact that the war campaign had ended so quickly, talking endlessly about her two kids and how dearly she missed them both. It was a fresh reminder of exactly what this army was fighting for. It was a joy for Inara, Arlo, and many of his top associates to respectfully sit back and overhear her banter about how amazing her civilian life was when she'd been freed of service all those years ago. And although it took some time to properly realize it, her speedy voice and ecstatic attitude was coming more from genuine nerves than it was from unbridled excitement. Over exactly what, though, I wasn't too sure. She did do well at holding the concentration of a group of friends when she was the only fresh face to that campfire cluster. But more than that, I was starting to believe her introduction among us was forced, and that she had drawn the short straw with those in her unit, being chosen as the one to introduce herself to us so that she could secretly pave the way for the rest of the unnamed beta soldiers who were, one by one, circling our bonfire and slowly inviting themselves into our inner circle. All those freshman soldiers wanted to be the next alphas and had started off by circling around our campsite, waiting for a moment of casual acceptance, enviously awaiting for some small mention of recognition so that they too could successfully merge their group with ours. just like Adria had done in the beginning, all by herself. Rather charismatic and joyful, though, Adria was a fresh burst of positivity, something you wouldn't expect, given just one glance at her. In all honesty, she looked rebellious and wicked, with black eyes and long dark hair, all shaded under a scary spiked metal battle helmet that ordinarily sat on her head, rather than against her lap, while she entertained the tiny masses. That intimidating helmet, quite possibly, was the very reason why none of us had never once seen her face prior to our campfire. But all the same, she kept everybody else enthralled with her stories, and did happen to make me smile and laugh. She was a lady on a mission, after all, somebody who yielded gifts, both dangerous and disgusting, as she sat there passively doing it before us, cracking and ripping out her fast-growing nails as many looked to the helmet of which they bounced and bucketed into, spitting out razor-sharp teeth every so often, as they added to the collection of sharp ivory she built her traps and snares with. She wore black leather that was stitched and embedded with serrated bone spikes. She had a mix of dyed black and brown body color, painted to resemble oak, or perhaps the bark of dying wildwood that was most prevalent to her own homeland out near the western mountains border. I stayed respectfully silent while I maintained my peace and listened to everyone around me. But by the time all these new introductions were made, the night had truly set upon us, and our small ring of dugout beach sand was as far as it could expand out. Like knights to a round table, we were entrenched by the very holes we had made in the sand by our legs digging seats, while piles of sand gusted in our face from the terrible wind block of sand mounds we made as new rings grew out further from the inner circle, the perimeter constantly increasing as two cheerful groups slowly merged into one. Most of the new soldiers within that inner circle were young rising stars like Arlo and Ebony. Many I would have been too embarrassed or shy to introduce myself to 1 week ago. But after my travels, I had no need to hide away anymore, as they were all going out of their way to nervously introduce themselves to me. I showed off a bit at times, the pulse of midnight setting in and becoming the prime time for my own mastery of the mists to paint pictures of creatures I had seen walking past me during my arrival at the hideout. I summoned shadows to my own careless whim, moving them around like living clay puppets amidst the outskirts of the campfire. Before I knew it, I was part of the social elites. Every soldier from other groups knew my name, and they began making their way over in a constant crowded invasion of our campfire space, roasting damper among our fires, taking some of Jax's honey jams from the jar to enhance the taste of the dough. It was a time for all those tough soldiers to sit back and relax, while the invited stewards and village cooks got to work, creating snacks and dinners they brought to the firesides, taking us briefly away from the barbaric and nomadic lifestyle we had been living over the past few days. Shortly before the warden Adria's abrupt departure, however, she shared with us one last ghost story, a sense of imagination and historical recreation brought visually to life as I used my shadows to blur the lines between myth and reality. The story was simple, as we all knew it well, but her black eyes were completely withdrawn, as if this particular fable had some truth or unforgettable memory attached to it. A wicked and grotesque tale of necromancy, witches, and prophets of death she insisted was as true as tropical rain. She continued to grow, grind, and graft ivory from her skin as she retold the old story, but no one but me seemed to notice those spitting teeth and bone fragments as the storytelling artist within her had come out to, well and truly, painting her fantasy into each nymph's gullible mind. I, myself, was sitting the closest to her on the fire, breathing out cooled air as a man who could turn dirt into sharp icy mud spikes peered towards me from the opposite side of the fire, doing his all to avoid each awkward glance we locked together before stating quietly, "No thanks," when I politely offered him the plates and sponge cakes I first assumed he was staring towards. Many members of Arlo's old unit were in close attendance, all trying to pretend they weren't bullies to me back in my previous life. Back before the dynamic shift of authority and power, I found it hard to remind myself that I didn't like any of them, despite how polite and nice they were currently treating me. "Don't even think about it," I scolded a man who was about to hit a servant's backside with a wooden spoon, my defiance catching Anara's eye. She just smiled with a look that confirmed what I knew she was thinking, giving that very same steward her own spot beside herself, and handing him a piece of the dessert he'd given out, symbolizing to all those around us that even with great success, I and her weren't going to stand for inequality just because someone might be more noble than those who were next to them. Adria's final tale was the most terrifying of all. It was the story of the Nyx monster, a moonlight-driven night stalker who was allegedly pulled down from the heavens for being too wrathful and cruel to be allowed to remain up in the kingdom among the clouds. It was a silly fable I had heard many times before as a child, but one I had rarely put any thought into until the first eclipse I walked through, probably because it was a tale so terrifying at nighttime it could bring chills to even Adria's tough audience. Our story went all the way back to the days of our species' forerunners, the first sea nymphs to come out of the ocean and settle upon the land, back when us sprites were just sirens committing heresy by abandoning the hunt for meat and choosing to live peacefully of jungle terrain instead. It was said that the Nyx was one of the first of the forest nymphs to grow wings and ascend, but later refused to stick with fruit over flesh when flight gave its primal instincts much added strength. And so it was kicked out from the heavens, left to prey on all the bottom dwellers, like us, who never had an ability to adapt and ascend. Unrivaled by its feelings of hatred and betrayal, the dark angel was said to have hunted and eaten all nymphs alike, and began to blacken the sky with clouds in order to block out the sun and starve out its own kind so that they could share its pain. It was also said that this Nyx assassin's capture brought our very civilization to the brink of extinction. Its capture was a victory only accomplished when both the wisp angels and siren succubi teamed up to vanquish the foul creature from the middle land. All three species of nymphs working together to destroy the monster and build the magical moth-head totem shrines that helped to ward off that evil being's everlasting spirit. The night ended on that bedtime story. With nothing to top that tall tale monster myth, things quickly began to quieten down and subside, with most nymphs wandering back to their own campsites to sleep, while those, like myself, who were passionate to remain, moved closer to renew the dimming fire. Odie in particular needed the company and some extra reassurance as he was most notably spooked by the tale he had never heard before. Things non-materialistic in nature being the only thing that scares someone, built with a skin as hardened as coarse as rock and stone. I was amazed to realize that, just like those sirens who'd become wisps in the story Adria had told, I too had evolved into something so much more. I saw how strangers and enemies could turn into colleagues and friends. When shared events like these happen and manage to bring new kinds of families together, it was a pleasant experience that came with a feeling of belonging that I had never properly felt before. And I liked it. I liked it a lot. And so, well after midnight, I was left staring blankly at the prison carriage as my thoughts drifted wildly. Part of me felt guilty about leaning backwards in comfortable bliss, while the underprivileged were stuck in cramped quarters and denied basic rights, while at the same point feeling almost as if I deserved more than those members because I had fought harder to make something of myself. I wondered whether that was the very sense of entitlement all corrupt rich nobles get when they start noticing the lines between first and second-class citizens. Looking over the iron carriage, wondering how the prisoners were doing, whether they were even alive, I spotted bags of food supplies floating in midair, like magic, being passed into the prison caravans from the side Melina wasn't facing. Obviously, Anera felt the same sympathy for those poor nymphs as I did, with Anera offering them all at least a certain degree of compassion, unlike her mother. As tiring as it's been, I don't know if I'm ready to go home yet, Arlo whispered to me, staring up at faint star constellations amidst the twilight night sky. I feel the same, I responded, looking at the exact same spot in the sky, staring towards two particular constellations we had both seen in Melina's war wagon roof art. They moved across the sky in real life and real time, as close as can be, yet never physically able to touch. We turned to face each other, while Odie, Maxwell, and a few others all slept and snored by the fires on each side of us. Neither him nor I showing any form of appropriate cordiality while Anera remained slumped in Nakoni's arms mid-slumber. She'd somehow managed to nestle herself back around the bonfire without anyone noticing her disappearance to the prison carriage, obviously faking a deep, heavy sleep. There's a lot we're going to have to adjust to when we get home. A brighter world is about to come back because of that crystal you helped save, I added. Yeah, I know, he replied, possibly worrying a little about the day he'd soon become our new king. Nights have always been a precursor to fear and terror, but I don't really feel that way about them anymore. I guess there's a certain peacefulness to them we have long since lived without, he said, staring out to the sandbanks spotted across a windy beach and ocean. You look a little lost yourself, he stated to me. Yeah, I am a little, I acknowledged. How come? What is it you're afraid of? I hesitated to respond, though, wondering how far I wanted to include him into my current thought pattern. Being wrong about something very important, I eventually explained to him, met by his curious gaze and show of concern. Arlo, what if Midas isn't crazy? Taken aback by it, possibly because he had never once thought to question it for himself, he took a moment to respond, looking to make sure Akoni was well and truly asleep before voicing any opinion at all. You're a very smart girl, he incited. Smart enough for me to trust your fears are usually well warranted. But wouldn't you also agree that sometimes being so smart isn't always an advantage? He asked. And why is that? I answered, slightly confused. Because paranoia seems like it's much more prominent in the clever, don't you think? He quickly added. Don't overanalyze things because you simply wish they could be different. Didn't someone once say that even the wise man dwells in fool's paradise? I mean, it's okay to have faith in others, but you shouldn't go letting your hopes outweigh your intuition, he insightfully said, lying backwards, happy with what was most likely the single smartest thing I'd ever heard him say. Yeah, well, it's wise lady to you, thanks, I teased. I'm pretty sure I'll be a lady of the court after all I've done for you, I added. Fair enough, he laughed. I guess we're not really children anymore. No, we really aren't anymore, I said back to him, staring into his eyes for longer than I cared to admit, looking over to his mother guarding the prisoner carriage from the outside back ledge. Her own eyes glued towards me while her hand pressed to her side, trying to suppress some mild muscle pains and agony. Okay, so answer me this then, Arlo, I invited, looking back to him as I said it. Other than the damages Midas did to the Sunspire, his own Sunspire, what makes Midas so evil? What do you mean? Have you not seen it more than most? What he has done with his own 2 hands? 2 days ago, we invaded his home. We ransacked his goods and stole from his underprivileged brethren. How is he worse than us? I argued. He stole from us because he could, just as we did when we could. The only difference is his people were more starved than ours, I muttered to Arlo, looking at him with a need of clerical wisdom I knew he wasn't going to be able to provide. Do you know what the word vanguard means, and why every soldier here wants to be a part of it? He then asked after a long pause. It means to be the leader of a movement, or the first into flight, I responded, waiting to see the relevance of his question. Exactly, he stated, because we send the best soldiers into battle first so we can minimize our casualties, a battle tactic decreed by King Midas many decades ago. Something that has never once been changed, he explained. That's why every devoted knight dreams to be in the 1st Regiment, for the honor and prestige of being one of the toughest, bravest, and most virtuous soldiers around. To be someone who is called upon first, so that they'll spare lesser-trained fighters from an early death, he answered, educating me about the values of valor him and knights like him held to great regard. But gnolls don't fight like that. The weakest of the litter were always sent in first, made to tire us out and ensure only the strongest ever rise in rank. This tactic is much more easy and effective to implement. It helps to conserve food and resources and pretty much is the best way to win a war. But it's also sadistic and cruel. What I'm trying to say is that there is a monumental difference between being an army that fight to survive and being an army that cause mayhem without any intention of preserving life. So I have no sympathy for any of them, he then declared. Midas may be Akoni's father, Kaya, but he is also a traitor. Not just to the crown, but also to everything he once stood for. Don't let looks or sentiment confuse you on that. Maybe he was once a good man, but he isn't that same man anymore, he said, throwing a stick he had been burning away from our dwindling campfire, almost as if that stick might have resembled the conclusion of the discussion. But what if he's not the gnoll leader? I dared to question, bold enough to make that ludicrous claim, having to check again to make sure Akoni was still asleep before being able to talk to someone who I knew wouldn't hold back his honest thoughts about the topic. We saw him with our very own eyes. We found gnoll shrouds in their tunnels, and his machines were roughly the right shape and size as typical gnolls. Honestly, I don't know what more proof you need. These are some pretty strong and undeniable facts you seem to be forgetting. he stated calmly but adamant that there was no chance of changing his opinion on the matter. I get that it's sometimes smart to be a skeptic, but you do understand how far-fetched and dangerous claims like those are, don't you? He asked, placing a hand on my arm in concern over how casually I was being about the precarious subject. You said you liked me because I would rather tell ugly truths over beautiful lies, I recited back to him. But this isn't truth, Kaya. It's conspiracy. And my mother prosecutes rebels for a great deal less, he warned. My efforts in convincing him had begun to cease as he looked and waited for me to say something more about it. What more evidence do you need? He asked, continuing the subject. A confession? I stated sarcastically back. You want me to go over there and ask him? Yes, I do, I immediately responded. What would that even prove? Why would he tell the truth? He asked. Arlo, I said loudly and sharply, staring directly into his eyes with a devoted cause. Why do you think he would need to lie? He already has nothing left to lose. Well, I don't need to ask. I already know what he'll say, he badgered back. Which is what? This is dumb, he provoked, trying to end the conversation. Humor me, I pressed, asking one last time, but grinning over the absurdity of it as he shook his head before smiling to a slow but defeated response. Midas would say that he is innocent, and it wasn't him, he replied, finally realizing the point I was trying to make about reasonable doubt and being innocent until proven guilty, rather the other way around. Sometimes you are too clever for your own good, but you're right this time, he confessed. When he was first vanished, we gave him a trial, and I'll make sure his voice is heard at least once by the council before any punishment is enforced. So long as you don't become the next Midas before then, he joked. I grinned. Deal. We took a moment to sit back and stretch out in front of the dying fire, keeping ourselves warm from a rather chilled night air, sharing the same blanket, too close for comfort seeing as everyone else had distanced themselves enough to doze off to sleep. Stuck among the most beautiful and scenic surroundings, embers flickering against our arms on occasion. They could really use someone like you on the council, Arlo said, breaking the brief silence of night. I strongly doubt your mother would want that, I responded, avoiding telling him the exact reason why I already knew it could never be so. And that's exactly why they need you there, he mischievously replied. Besides, I don't think you have to worry about my mother fixating on you anymore, he stated naively, believing his mother would hold no more grudges towards me after I'd saved her life back in the caverns. I didn't want to ruin the moment by telling him she'd banish me from the capital, as it was clear that no one else but Milena and I knew of that so far. Can I ask one more thing? I said openly. I don't know. You ask a lot, he joked with a laugh, slumping against the sand. Back at Ambervale, when you beat the skilled swordsman, I saw you look right into that creature's face before it disappeared, I said, my question stunning him almost dramatically as he stared off in self-reflection. Well, what did you see? I asked. I don't know, he stated rather strangely and defensively. Please, you can tell me. It was nothing. I was delirious, he stated timidly. Please, I really want to know, I persisted. He stammered. Well, I saw myself, he confessed to a joint confusion between both of us, his answer only raising more questions. But out of respect, I chose not to push the topic, seeing how unnerved his recollection of it seemed to trouble him. We made a great team that night, though, the four of us, Arlo was quick to add, changing the subject. I always knew Oconee had some warrior's instinct. The only reason my mother never drafted him into the ranks was simply because he was more beneficial to us as an engineer. But you, though, you've only just touched the surface of what you can do. In environments like this, I honestly think you're limitless. We do complement each other very well, I agreed, referring to all four of us as I looked over at Oconee and Anera while they slept. But if you're the strong one, and your sister is a fast one, and Oconee is a smart one, what am I exactly? I asked curiously, wondering what he thought of me. What's my purpose in this new squad of yours? Our mascot, he teased, retreating before I punched him playfully in the arm. I'm joking, he whimpered, looking back to me and my fake angry face, before surrendering to a more serious demeanor. "You're special," he added sweetly, a small chuckle mixed with both embarrassment and sincerity to his red face. "Hey, would you want to go for a night swim? Maybe wash away all those crazy fears of yours?" He surprisingly next invited. It looks freezing out there," I responded. "And dangerous," he cheerfully added, standing up, removing the wrapped-up blanket from around his waistline and bringing more of it upwards to cover my shoulders. "Last chance," he stated with a small smirk and smile, a hand extended out to pull me up if I caved to his peer pressure. "Nah, I'm okay. It's cold enough," I replied, the temptation to follow being as strong as ever. But the path to where it led me being somewhere so cold and dangerous, I knew it was for those with a different kind of bravery. So instead, I just sat and watched as he walked over and plunged himself deep into those cold ocean waves. It was there I came to the sudden realization that I had experienced and participated more in that one short week than I ever had in my entire life. And that if I took Melena's money, I would never get to have another week like it again. That I could leave the entire servant life I knew behind, including all of the friends and duties I had come to cherish. That I was about to live forever with only the memories of the man I wanted to be with, while he moved on to marry another without ever knowing how I felt about him. I wanted to believe that I had gone to the caverns to help save the boys because I had gained the courage and valor to do so. But I was never acting upon decisions that needed to be made, but rather just reacting. Where, in truth, my only real reason for going on that mission was because I loved them both dearly. One because he was the closest thing I had to family, and the other because every moment I spent with him was one more moment he would be away from Ebony, his recently betrothed. The lies we tell ourselves can be sweet, so much easier to digest than the non-virtuous truth, but there was no lying to myself anymore. If I joined Arlo in the ocean, then I would be the siren that sung her song, luring a man away from the safety of the shore. And even though it was going to take all my strength to do right by him, I knew the best thing I could do for my future king was to leave him behind without the option of confusing him any more than he had to be.